The evening sun cast long shadows across the quiet suburban street as a middle-aged man walked home from his shift at the local community center. He carried a worn leather briefcase filled with children's artwork, treasures from the art therapy sessions he'd been conducting for the past 5 years. Little did he know that this ordinary evening would turn his life upside down. As he turned onto his street, 2 police cars suddenly pulled up beside him, their lights flashing. Before he could process what was happening, officers jumped out with their weapons drawn, ordering him to get on the ground. Confused and terrified, he complied, the children's artwork scattering across the sidewalk as his briefcase fell. "You have the right to remain silent," an officer recited while handcuffing him. The neighbors he'd known for years peeked through their windows and gathered on their porches, watching in shock as the man they'd seen every day was being arrested. He could hear whispers and see phones recording the scene, his reputation crumbling with each passing second. At the police station, he sat in the interrogation room, still bewildered by the situation. The detective who entered carried a thick file and wore a stern expression. "We've been tracking a series of sophisticated bank frauds in the area," the detective explained, sliding photographs across the table. "Your face matches our suspect's description perfectly." The accused man's heart sank. He had spent the last 20 years building a life dedicated to helping troubled youth, and now he was being accused of something he couldn't even comprehend. "There must be some mistake," he pleaded, his voice trembling. "I've never been involved in anything illegal. I work with children at the community center. Please, check my background." But the evidence seemed stacked against him. Security camera footage showed someone who looked remarkably similar to him entering various banks over the past month. The suspect had stolen millions through an elaborate check fraud scheme, and all signs pointed to him being the culprit. His phone calls from jail went unanswered as friends and colleagues distanced themselves. The local news ran his story, and social media exploded with discussions about the trusted community worker who had allegedly been living a double life. His sister, the only family member who stood by him, worked tirelessly to prove his innocence. Days turned into weeks as he sat in his cell, his mind racing through possibilities of how this could have happened. The children's artwork from his briefcase had been collected as evidence, each piece examined for hidden codes or messages. He couldn't help but laugh at the irony. Those drawings were meant to help children heal, not land him in jail. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of the children from his art therapy group recognized someone else in the security footage that had been circulating online. "That's not Mr. Thompson," the child had insisted to their parents. "The man in the video doesn't have the scar on his hand from when he rescued his dog." This small detail sparked a reinvestigation. The police began to notice other inconsistencies they had overlooked in their rush to make an arrest. The suspect in the footage moved differently, his gestures were not the same, and most importantly, he lacked the distinctive scar that the community center worker had gained from a heroic act years ago. As investigators dug deeper, they discovered something that made them freeze. The real perpetrator was part of an international crime syndicate that specialized in finding lookalikes of law-abiding citizens. They would study their targets for months, learning their mannerisms and routines, before using their remarkable resemblance to commit crimes. The investigation took an even more bizarre turn when they found out why he had been chosen. His dedication to helping troubled youth had made him the perfect target, someone whose character was so clean that few would question his guilt once accused. The criminals had counted on his reputation working against him, making the perfect cover for their operation. While he sat in his cell, unaware of these developments, the real criminal network was beginning to unravel. The police had stumbled upon something much bigger than a series of local bank frauds. They had discovered a pattern of similar cases across the country, where upstanding citizens had been framed for crimes committed by their doppelgangers. The truth was stranger than any fiction, and as the sun set on his 15th day in custody, the man who had dedicated his life to helping others had no idea that his ordeal was about to come to an end, or that his case would lead to one of the biggest breakthroughs in international law enforcement history. Dawn broke over the city as Detective Chen stared at the wall of evidence in the precinct. Something about this case had been bothering her since the beginning. The security footage played on a loop on one of the screens, showing the suspect moving through various banks with practiced ease. She'd watched it hundreds of times, but today, something clicked. "Play it again," she ordered, leaning closer to the screen. The suspect's movements were fluid, almost theatrical. Having interviewed the community center worker multiple times, she'd noticed he had a slight hesitation in his left step, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. The man in the footage moved with perfect balance. It was subtle, but it was there. Meanwhile, in his cell, the accused man had started documenting everything he could remember about the days leading up to his arrest. He recalled a strange incident from 3 weeks ago, a tourist who'd asked to take a photo with him outside the community center, claiming he looked exactly like someone they knew. At the time, it had seemed like an innocent encounter. His sister, who worked as a data analyst, had been running her own parallel investigation. She'd created a timeline of her brother's activities, cross-referencing them with the bank fraud incidents. Something strange emerged. Some of the frauds had occurred while her brother was teaching art therapy sessions, surrounded by dozens of witnesses. How could he be in 2 places at once? Detective Chen received an urgent call from Interpol. Similar cases had been reported in 3 other countries, respected community figures suddenly accused of sophisticated crimes, with seemingly irrefutable evidence against them. The pattern was impossible to ignore. In each case, the accused had one thing in common: they worked with vulnerable populations, children, elderly, or disabled individuals. The investigation took an unexpected turn when one of the accused man's former students, now a college freshman studying computer science, approached the police with an interesting observation. She had been analyzing the viral videos of his arrest and noticed something in the background: a distinctive car that appeared in several other videos of crimes being committed across the city. The police began surveillance on the vehicle, leading them to a surprising discovery. The car belonged to a small photography studio that had recently opened near the community center. On the surface, it appeared to be a legitimate business, but their client list contained an unusual number of people who worked in community service positions. Detective Chen organized a raid on the studio. What they found inside made her blood run cold. The walls were lined with photographs of various individuals, teachers, social workers, counselors, all meticulously documented with notes about their daily routines, mannerisms, and distinctive features. Among them was a large file dedicated to the community center worker, containing everything from his coffee preferences to the exact length of his stride. The studio turned out to be a front for something far more sinister. The international crime syndicate had been using it to study their targets, creating detailed profiles that allowed their look-alike criminals to perfectly mimic their victims. They weren't just stealing money, they were stealing entire identities, carefully selected for their trustworthiness and social standing. Back in his cell, the accused man received an unexpected visitor, one of his regular art therapy students, a 12-year-old girl who had refused to believe in his guilt. She had brought him a drawing, one she'd made during their last session together. As he looked at it, his eyes widened. In the background of her artwork, she had unconsciously captured something crucial: the same photographer who'd been following him, caught in the act through the innocent eyes of a child. The evidence began to mount. The photography studio's computer systems revealed an elaborate network of surveillance operations. They had been watching their targets for months, sometimes years, before making their move. The community center worker had been chosen not just for his appearance, but for his predictable routine and the trust he had built within the community. Detective Chen discovered that the syndicate had a sophisticated method for selecting their targets. They looked for people whose roles in society made them almost above suspicion, knowing that once accused, the shock value would make their guilt seem more plausible. The perfect disguise wasn't just about looking like someone, it was about destroying the credibility of good people to create cover for criminal activities. The investigation revealed another disturbing detail. The syndicate had been using advanced facial recognition technology to find people who naturally looked similar to their targets. They weren't using masks or makeup, they were finding real doppelgangers and training them to become perfect imposters. The community center workers' look-alike had been recruited from another country, specifically because of their uncanny resemblance. As the truth began to emerge, the implications became clear. This wasn't just about clearing one man's name, it was about exposing a criminal enterprise that had found a way to weaponize trust itself. They had created a system where the most trustworthy members of society became unwitting shields for criminal activity, their reputation serving as the perfect smokescreen. The sun set on another day in custody, but this time, hope was on the horizon. Detective Chen had enough evidence to prove the existence of the impersonation scheme. Now, she just needed to find the actual perpetrator, the man who had borrowed not just a face, but an entire life, leaving an innocent man to take the fall for crimes he never committed. The early morning briefing room buzzed with nervous energy as Detective Chen laid out the latest discoveries. The photography studio had been just the tip of the iceberg. Behind its legitimate facade lay a network so sophisticated that it made veteran officers question everything they thought they knew about identity theft. "We're not just dealing with simple impersonation," Chen explained, pointing to a complex web of connections on the evidence board. "These people aren't just stealing faces, they're stealing lives." The investigation had revealed that the syndicate had been operating for years, carefully selecting targets whose positions in society made them perfect covers for criminal activity. Meanwhile, the community center worker's sister had made a breakthrough of her own. While reviewing security footage from various locations around the city, she noticed something peculiar. The imposter had a barely perceptible habit of touching his left earlobe before entering any building. It was the kind of detail that would have been missed if she hadn't spent years watching her brother's mannerisms. In his cell, the accused man received news that changed everything. His youngest art therapy student, the one who had noticed the scar discrepancy, had been digging through her old drawings. She found several sketches from the past few months that showed the same mysterious figure in the background, the photographer who had been documenting his every move. Detective Chen's team raided several more locations connected to the photography studio. In a small warehouse on the outskirts of town, they discovered a training facility where the syndicate's impersonators perfected their acts. The space was set up like a theater, with video screens showing their targets' daily routines on endless loops. Props and clothing identical to those worn by the targets lined the walls. The investigation took an unexpected turn when one of the cleaning staff at the community center came forward with crucial information. She remembered seeing someone who looked exactly like the accused man entering the building late at night, long after everyone had left. But something had seemed off. This person had struggled with the security code, despite the real worker having used it daily for years. The police technology unit made a startling discovery while analyzing the studio's computer systems. The syndicate had developed an artificial intelligence program that scanned millions of faces worldwide, looking for natural doppelgangers of their intended targets. They weren't just finding random lookalikes, they were scientifically matching facial features down to the millimeter. Back at the precinct, an old case file caught Detective Chen's attention. 3 years ago, a bank teller had reported serving the same customer twice in one day, except the customer had insisted they hadn't visited the bank at all. The case had been dismissed as a mix-up, but now it carried new significance. It had been the syndicate's first test run in the city. The community center worker's reputation had begun to recover as news of the investigation spread. His former colleagues, who had initially distanced themselves, started coming forward with character statements and alibis. One brought security footage from the center's parking lot, showing him teaching classes at the exact time some of the bank frauds had occurred. Detective Chen received an encrypted message from an anonymous source within the criminal organization. The whistleblower revealed that the syndicate didn't just choose targets randomly, they specifically selected people who worked with vulnerable populations because these professions required extensive background checks. The cleaner someone's record, the more valuable they became as a target. The breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected quarter. A local coffee shop owner approached the police with footage from his security cameras. For months, he had served both the real community center worker and, unknowingly, his imposter. The footage showed subtle differences in how they interacted with staff and handled their payments, differences that became crucial evidence when analyzed by behavioral experts. As Detective Chen delved deeper into the syndicate's operations, she discovered something disturbing. The organization had been gathering intelligence on potential targets for years before making any moves. They had files on hundreds of people, teachers, nurses, social workers, all carefully selected for their spotless reputations and predictable routines. The accused man's sister made another crucial connection. While reviewing financial records, she noticed that small test transactions had been made in her brother's name months before the major frauds began. The syndicate had been practicing, ensuring their imposter could perfectly mimic her brother's banking habits before attempting larger crimes. The investigation revealed that the syndicate's choice of the community center worker hadn't been random. They had selected him because of his work with troubled youth, knowing that his dedication to helping others would make him appear above suspicion. They had counted on people believing that someone who devoted their life to helping children couldn't possibly be involved in financial crimes. As the sun set on another day of investigation, Detective Chen stood before the evidence board, connecting final pieces of the puzzle. The syndicate hadn't just created a crime network, they had built an entire industry around destroying the reputations of society's most trusted members. In doing so, they had found a way to commit crimes that went beyond mere financial gain. They were attacking the very fabric of community trust. The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together, but Detective Chen knew they were running out of time. The syndicate had begun erasing their traces, and the photographer's studio had been completely wiped clean the night after the raid. They needed to act fast before more evidence disappeared. A breakthrough came from the most unexpected source. An elderly woman living across from the community center had been documenting neighborhood activities in her journal for years. Her detailed notes included something crucial: she had spotted two identical men entering the center on the same day, but at different times. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her, but her meticulous diary entries proved otherwise. The accused man's cell phone records revealed another vital clue. In the weeks before his arrest, he had received several silent calls from untraceable numbers. The timing of these calls coincided perfectly with his movements around the city. The syndicate had been testing their surveillance system, ensuring they knew his exact location at all times. Detective Chen assembled a specialized task force, including cyber experts and behavioral analysts. They began mapping out the syndicate's pattern, discovering that similar cases had occurred in other cities. Each time, the target was someone whose profession involved helping others: counselors, teachers, social workers. The organization had turned goodwill into a vulnerability. In his cell, the community center worker received an unexpected piece of news. One of his former students, now working in digital forensics, had been analyzing the security footage from the banks. Using advanced software, she discovered subtle digital alterations in some of the videos. The syndicate hadn't just relied on their imposter's natural resemblance, they had enhanced it through careful video manipulation. The investigation took a dramatic turn when Detective Chen's team intercepted a communication between syndicate members. They discovered that the organization had a hierarchy of targets, ranking them based on their social standing and the potential impact of their fall from grace. The community center worker had been given their highest rating. His dedication to helping troubled youth made his apparent turn to crime all the more shocking. Meanwhile, the sisters' persistent research uncovered something disturbing in the financial records. The fraudulent transactions hadn't just been about stealing money, they were designed to create a specific narrative. The amounts and timing of the transfers painted a picture of someone desperately trying to cover up a non-existent gambling addiction, adding another layer to the syndicate's elaborate deception. The police technology unit made a breakthrough in tracking the imposters' movements. By analyzing cell tower data, they discovered that the double had been living in a small apartment just 3 blocks from the community center. The location had been chosen carefully, close enough to observe the target's daily routine, but far enough to avoid accidental encounters. A local bank employee came forward with crucial information. She remembered helping both the real community center worker and his imposter, noting that while they looked identical, there was one key difference: their handwriting. The real worker's signature had a slight tremor, a result of an old injury, while the imposter's was perfectly steady. Detective Chen's investigation revealed another disturbing aspect of the syndicate's operation. They had been monitoring their target's social media accounts for years, using artificial intelligence to analyze speech patterns, mannerisms, and social connections. This data was used to train their imposters, ensuring they could convincingly interact with the target's friends and colleagues. The community began rallying around the accused man as more evidence of the conspiracy came to light. Former students organized a support campaign, sharing stories of how his art therapy sessions had changed their lives. These testimonials painted a picture of someone whose character was fundamentally incompatible with the crimes he was accused of. The syndicate's carefully constructed plan began showing cracks. A junior member of the organization, moved by the public support for the community center worker, reached out to Detective Chen. He provided crucial information about the imposter's training process, revealing that they spent months studying their targets through hidden cameras and microphones planted throughout their daily routes. As pressure mounted, the investigation uncovered the syndicate's endgame. They weren't just committing bank fraud, they were gathering intelligence on vulnerable youth through their targeted attacks on social workers and counselors. The financial crimes were just a cover for a more insidious operation targeting society's most vulnerable members. The accused man's art therapy students proved to be unexpected allies in the investigation. Their drawings, collected over months of sessions, contained background details that corroborated the timeline of surveillance. Through their artwork, they had unknowingly documented the presence of people watching their beloved teacher. Detective Chen realized that time was running out. The syndicate's pattern suggested they would soon move on to another city, another target. They needed to act quickly, but they also needed to be careful. One wrong move could spook the organization, sending them underground and leaving the community center worker to take the fall for their crimes. The police station hummed with nervous energy as Detective Chen unveiled their next move. After weeks of careful planning, they had finally identified a pattern in the imposter's behavior. Every Sunday morning, he would visit a small diner on the outskirts of town, a creature of habit, just like the man he was impersonating. While preparing for their operation, the investigation team made a startling discovery. The diner wasn't just a random location, it was a meeting point. Hidden cameras installed by the cyber unit had captured multiple meetings between the imposter and other members of the syndicate. They gathered there because it was the last place anyone would expect to find a sophisticated criminal enterprise. In his cell, the community center worker received news that brought tears to his eyes. His students had organized an art exhibition titled "Through Our Eyes," displaying artwork that unknowingly documented the months leading up to his arrest. The drawings showed shadowy figures in the background, strange cars parked across the street, and other details that now served as crucial evidence. Detective Chen's team intercepted another communication that changed everything. The syndicate wasn't just targeting the community center worker, he was part of a larger operation targeting social workers across the country. Each target was chosen for their work with vulnerable populations, creating a network of compromised positions that the syndicate could exploit. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A food delivery driver recognized the imposter from news coverage but remembered delivering to him at a different address months before the crimes began. This led police to a safe house where they discovered detailed files on potential targets, including photographs, daily schedules, and even recorded conversations. The community center worker's sister made another crucial connection. While reviewing security footage from various locations, she noticed that the imposter always carried a specific brand of coffee cup, not from the local shop her brother frequented, but from another cafe across town. This small detail helped police track his daily movements and identify more meeting locations. The investigation revealed something even more disturbing. The syndicate had been placing their own people in positions throughout the community, as janitors, delivery personnel, and even temporary staff at the community center. They had created an invisible network of observers, all feeding information back to the organization. Detective Chen's behavioral analysis team made a breakthrough in understanding the imposter's psychology. Unlike other members of the syndicate, he showed signs of genuine remorse in his recorded conversations. He had chosen the diner meetings because it was the one place he felt he could be himself, away from the pressure of maintaining his false identity. The support for the imprisoned community center worker continued to grow. Former students came forward with years of saved text messages and emails, proving his character through hundreds of small acts of kindness and encouragement. These digital breadcrumbs painted a picture of someone who had spent years building trust, not destroying it. The police technology unit discovered something crucial in the syndicate's communications. They were using an advanced AI system to analyze their targets' vocal patterns and mannerisms. The imposter had spent months listening to recordings of the community center worker's voice, learning to match his speech patterns and emotional responses perfectly. As the investigation deepened, they uncovered the true scope of the syndicate's operation. It wasn't just about financial fraud, they were gathering sensitive information about vulnerable youth through their targeted attacks on social workers. The banking crimes were a smokescreen for a more sinister data-gathering operation. The community center's security cameras yielded another vital clue. On several occasions, they had captured both the real worker and his imposter in the same frame, though at different times. When analyzed side by side, subtle differences became apparent: the way they moved, interacted with others, and responded to unexpected situations. Detective Chen received an anonymous tip that would change everything. A former syndicate member, troubled by conscience, revealed that the organization had a fatal flaw in their perfect plan. The imposter's training, while extensive, couldn't account for genuine emotional connections. He could mimic behavior, but he couldn't replicate the years of trust and rapport the real worker had built with his students. The investigation team made another crucial discovery. The syndicate had been using advanced facial recognition software to find potential targets, scanning millions of faces to find perfect matches. But this technology had left a digital trail, leading back to their central operation through a series of supposedly untraceable servers. As the evidence mounted, the true genius of the syndicate's plan became clear. They hadn't just chosen targets for their physical appearance, they had selected people whose dedication to helping others made them seem above suspicion. The community center worker's reputation had been both his greatest strength and his greatest vulnerability. The Sunday morning operation was set. Detective Chen's team had positioned themselves strategically around the diner, waiting for the imposter to make his regular appearance. The air was thick with tension as unmarked police vehicles blended seamlessly with the usual morning traffic. Inside his cell, the community center worker received an unexpected visit from the diner's owner. She had been reviewing months of security footage and noticed something peculiar. The imposter had been coming to her diner long before the crimes began, slowly adopting the mannerisms and habits of the man he would later frame. But there was something else: he always sat at the same table, always facing the door, as if waiting for someone. The investigation team had made another breakthrough. While analyzing the syndicate's communication patterns, they discovered that the organization used a complex system of rotating coffee shops and diners as meeting points. Each location was chosen for its proximity to their targets' workplaces, creating a network of observation posts disguised as ordinary businesses. Detective Chen's behavioral analysts had compiled a psychological profile of the imposter that revealed something unexpected. Unlike other members of the syndicate, he had spent time volunteering at various community centers before beginning his assignment. It seemed he had been trying to understand not just how to act like his target, but how it felt to be him. The community rallied in an unprecedented way. Local business owners began sharing security footage from the past year, creating a timeline of both the real worker and his double. The evidence showed something striking: while the imposter could copy actions and routines, he couldn't replicate the genuine warmth that made the community center worker so beloved. The sisters' persistence led to another crucial discovery. While reviewing bank records, she found that small donations had been made to the community center in her brother's name during times he was documented elsewhere. The syndicate hadn't just been practicing their financial fraud, they had been testing the authenticity of their imposter's identity through charitable giving. As the morning wore on, tension at the diner reached its peak. The regular customers had been quietly replaced by undercover officers, each one carefully briefed on their role. The waitress, who had served both the real worker and his double, was key to their plan. She would signal the team when the imposter arrived. The technology unit made a startling discovery while monitoring the syndicate's communications. They weren't just targeting individuals, they were creating a database of behavioral patterns, using artificial intelligence to predict how people in helping professions would react in various situations. The community center worker had been chosen as a test case for their most ambitious project yet. Back at the precinct, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. A former student who had been working on a documentary about the community center shared footage that captured something crucial. In the background of several interviews, the same nondescript van appeared, its windows tinted just enough to hide camera equipment inside. Detective Chen received word that changed the entire operation. The syndicate had been alerted to their presence at the diner. Instead of backing down, she made a bold decision. Using the behavioral profile they had developed, she predicted that the imposter's guilt over his actions would make him more likely to take risks rather than abandon his routine. The community center's art therapy students had unknowingly provided another vital clue. In their recent artwork, several children had drawn the same mysterious figure watching their sessions through the windows. When compiled chronologically, these drawings showed the imposter's gradual integration into their community, like a shadow slowly taking form. The investigation revealed something that stunned even veteran officers. The syndicate hadn't just been studying their targets, they had been creating detailed psychological profiles of everyone in their victims' social circles. They needed to ensure their imposter could convince not just casual acquaintances, but people who had known their targets for years. As the morning crept toward noon, the waitress gave the signal they had been waiting for. The imposter had arrived, but something was different. He looked tired, worn down by the weight of his deception. As he took his usual seat, officers noticed he was carrying a thick envelope, something that hadn't been part of his regular routine. The sisters' analysis of the community center's visitor logs revealed another layer of the syndicate's operation. They had been sending different members to observe the target, each one focusing on a specific aspect of his behavior, his gait, his voice, his interactions with others. The imposter was just the final piece of a much larger operation. Detective Chen watched through the diner's window as the moment of truth approached. The imposter's hands shook slightly as he sipped his coffee, his eyes darting between the entrance and the envelope on his table. Years of experience told her that this wasn't just another Sunday meeting, something had changed. The question was whether they could use this change to their advantage, or if it would upend their carefully laid plans. The diner fell silent as Detective Chen made her move. Rather than storming in with a full team, she entered alone, dressed in civilian clothes. Years of experience had taught her that sometimes the softest approach yielded the strongest results. As she slid into the seat across from the imposter, his face showed a flicker of recognition, not surprise, but resignation. "I've been waiting for you," he said quietly, pushing the envelope across the table. Inside were dozens of photographs documenting his transformation, the months of preparation, the careful study of mannerisms, the gradual assumption of another man's life. But more importantly, there were names, dates, and locations of other syndicate operations across the country. Meanwhile, at the police station, the community center worker received unexpected news. His sister had discovered something in the syndicate's communications that changed everything. The imposter hadn't been chosen just for his physical resemblance, he had a personal connection to the community center. Years ago, as a troubled teen, he had attended similar programs in another city, programs that had failed him. Detective Chen's team, positioned throughout the diner, watched in tense silence as their superior officer engaged in quiet conversation with the man they'd been hunting. The imposter spoke softly about how he had been recruited, how the syndicate had found him working as a struggling street performer, using his natural ability to mimic others to survive. "They told me it was just another performance," he explained, his hands trembling around his coffee cup. "But watching him, learning his life, I started to understand what real purpose looks like. He helps kids who are just like I was, gives them the chance I never had." His voice cracked with emotion that no amount of training could fake. The investigation team made a breakthrough in understanding the syndicate's methodology. They didn't just train their imposters in physical mimicry, they immersed them in their targets' lives so completely that the line between performance and reality began to blur. The psychological toll of this process often led their operatives to develop genuine emotional connections to the lives they were supposed to be destroying. Back at the community center, former students had organized a virtual art therapy session, connecting online to create a collective piece about trust and identity. The artwork they created captured something profound: how one person's genuine dedication to helping others could create ripples of positive change, even in the face of attempted destruction. Detective Chen listened as the imposter revealed the syndicate's ultimate goal. They weren't just after money or information, they were attempting to destroy society's faith in its helpers and healers. By targeting those who worked with vulnerable populations, they hoped to create a climate of suspicion that would make their other operations easier to execute. The sisters' analysis of the evidence revealed another layer to the story. The imposter had been making small but significant changes to the syndicate's plans, subtly sabotaging operations in ways that wouldn't be immediately noticed. He had been leaving a trail of breadcrumbs, hoping someone would connect the dots. As the morning wore on, more undercover officers filtered into the diner, but Chen kept them at bay with subtle hand signals. The imposter was unraveling the entire operation, providing information that would take down not just this cell, but the entire network. His voice grew stronger as he spoke about other targets, other lives the syndicate planned to destroy. The technology unit made a crucial discovery while monitoring the diner's surroundings. The syndicate had surveillance teams in place, watching their own operative. They had suspected his loyalty was wavering and had been documenting his movements, creating a web of surveillance around their surveillance expert. In his cell, the community center worker received the first photos of his double, not from security cameras or surveillance footage, but from the man's own past. The resemblance was uncanny, but now he could see what others had noticed: the subtle differences in expression, the way sorrow and guilt had gradually transformed the imposter's features. Detective Chen's behavioral analysts provided live commentary through her earpiece as the conversation continued. The imposter's body language, his choice of words, the way he arranged objects on the table, everything confirmed that his defection was genuine. He wasn't just providing information, he was seeking redemption. The syndicate surveillance teams made their move, but Chen's people were ready. As black-clad figures emerged from various points around the diner, they found themselves surrounded by an even larger force of undercover officers. The trap had been reversed, turning the watchers into the watched. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. The imposter pulled out his phone and played a recording, conversations between syndicate leaders revealing their larger plan. They had similar operations running in cities across the globe, each one targeting people whose commitment to helping others made them valuable targets. The morning sun had climbed high in the sky as Detective Chen led the handcuffed syndicate surveillance team into police vehicles. The operation had yielded far more than they'd hoped, not just the imposter's confession, but an entire network of operatives caught in their own web of surveillance. The watchers had become the watched, their careful plans unraveling in a matter of hours. At the police station, the process of releasing the community center worker began. As the cell door opened, he found himself facing not just his sister, but a group of his students, their parents, and fellow teachers. They had gathered to welcome him back, holding artwork they'd created during his absence. Each piece told a story of resilience, trust, and the unbreakable bonds he'd built within the community. The imposter's confession had opened floodgates of information. He provided detailed accounts of the syndicate's operations, their methods of selecting targets, and most importantly, the location of their central database. The technology unit worked tirelessly to decrypt files that would help clear the names of other falsely accused individuals across the country. Detective Chen's team discovered something remarkable while processing the evidence. The syndicate had unknowingly documented their own downfall. Their surveillance footage, meant to monitor their imposter's loyalty, had instead captured his gradual transformation from a willing participant to someone wrestling with his conscience. The very tools they used for control had recorded their operative's journey toward redemption. The community center's board of directors called an emergency meeting. Instead of distancing themselves from the controversy, they decided to turn this experience into something positive. They announced the creation of a new program specifically designed to help young people who felt lost and unseen, the very circumstances that had led the imposter down his dark path years ago. In an unexpected turn of events, the imposter requested a meeting with the man he had impersonated. In a small conference room at the police station, two men who shared the same face but lived very different lives sat across from each other. The conversation that followed was recorded as evidence, but it became something more, a powerful testimony to the possibility of change. "I spent months learning how to be you," the imposter admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "But the more I learned, the more I realized what I could have become if someone like you had been there when I was younger." The community center worker listened with the same patience and compassion he showed his students, understanding that before him sat someone who needed the very help he'd dedicated his life to providing. The investigation's ripple effects reached far beyond their city. Law enforcement agencies across the country began reviewing cases where trusted community figures had been accused of unexplainable crimes. The syndicate's pattern emerged clearly now. They had been systematically targeting society's helpers, turning trust itself into a weapon. Detective Chen received commendations for her handling of the case, but she knew the real victory lay in what they had preserved rather than what they had caught. The syndicate had tried to destroy faith in human goodness, but their plan had backfired. The community's response, their unwavering support, their determination to find the truth, had demonstrated the very strength the criminals had tried to undermine. The community center worker returned to his duties, but things were different now. His experience had given him a unique perspective on trust, identity, and redemption. He incorporated these themes into his art therapy sessions, helping his students understand that even the darkest experiences could be transformed into something meaningful. In an unprecedented move, the imposter offered to help law enforcement understand and prevent similar crimes. His insights into the syndicate's psychological manipulation techniques proved invaluable. But more than that, his story became a powerful reminder that it's never too late to choose a different path. The sister's dedication to proving her brother's innocence led to a new career. She was hired by a cybersecurity firm specializing in identity protection, using her experience to help others safeguard themselves against increasingly sophisticated impersonation schemes. The skills she had developed while unraveling the syndicate's operation now served to prevent similar crimes. 1 year later, the community center hosted a special exhibition. The walls were lined with artwork created during the entire ordeal, from the children's drawings that had unknowingly documented the surveillance, to pieces created during their teacher's absence, to works that celebrated his return. Together, they told a story not just of deception and discovery, but of a community's unshakable faith in one of their own. The imposter, now serving a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation, began working with troubled youth through a supervised rehabilitation program. His unique perspective and genuine remorse made him particularly effective at reaching young people who felt tempted by similar offers of easy money and false identity. Detective Chen kept the case file on her desk as a reminder. It wasn't just about solving a crime, it was about protecting the people who dedicate their lives to helping others. The syndicate had tried to exploit the trust these helpers built, but in doing so, they had revealed its true strength. Trust, once earned through genuine care and dedication, couldn't be destroyed by even the most perfect deception. As the community center worker stood before his class, watching his students express their thoughts and feelings through art, he understood that his ordeal had taught him something profound. Identity isn't just about faces or fingerprints, it's about the connections we build, the lives we touch, and the trust we earn through countless small acts of kindness. No imposter, no matter how skilled, could ever truly replicate that.